I want to talk about is how we are when we're settled. And so I'm gonna just be as settled as I can be and probably talk kind of slowly to get us all in that sort of space. And I'm gonna talk for, I don't know, maybe a little while, and then I'd really love to hear from you guys. So if something comes up while I'm talking, please, jot it down, or, I hope you'll feel empowered to raise your hand, and I'd love for this to be a conversation. And what's the topic that you sent out about? It was about gratitude?
Yeah, giving thanks.
Yeah. So really what I'm going to talk to you about is what I've come to understand is how the mind works. And in that space, we'll touch on where gratitude lies and where gratitude comes from, and kind of the fact that it's always inside of us, that sometimes we sort of lose track of it. So just a couple years ago, I've been a coach since 2016, and I've been learning about how to observe people and how to observe myself and how to help people observe themselves, and that's been really cool. But a couple years ago, I came across an understanding that explains how the mind works, and from that space explains how we experience what we experience in our lives. And there's something about this understanding that when you start to see it, it kind of creates this magic. It opens up your way of experiencing life, and it's really cool. So I've become really enthusiastic about sharing it. And let me warn you before I start that I always get one of 4 responses when I talk about this. So chances are you're going to fall into one of these 4 categories, and so don't be surprised. So the first one is, when people hear this, sometimes they say, "Oh my God, that is so unbelievable. I've never looked at life that way before," and it's like shocking and eye-opening. Sometimes people hear it and they say, "Well, of course. What you're saying is common sense, and I've always known it, and you're not telling me anything new," which is also really cool. Sometimes people say, "I really don't understand what you're saying, but there's something about it that makes me want to hear more, so keep talking." And then the 4th response I get, and this is just as legitimate as all the others: "No, that's not my life. That's not how things work for me, and you're wrong." And so I would say, no matter which category you fall in there, give yourself a chance to have an open mind. This is an invitation. That's all it is, it's an invitation. So what I learned in 2017 is that there are 3 principles that explain how we experience the world. And these 3 principles were first articulated by a gentleman named Sydney Banks, and he basically had an enlightenment experience in the 70s. He was a very spiritual guy, but not religious at all. But he started to see something that he hadn't seen before, and he started to share it with the world. And if you're ever interested in Googling him, actually his website is still up, and there's lots of resources on it. His name is Sydney Banks. And what these 3 principles are, they are called mind, consciousness, and thought. And so just to back up a little bit, so what's a principle? A principle is something that's true for everyone, that we experience whether we notice it or not, and it's just there. And one of the best examples is gravity. Right? Gravity is a principle, it's always there, we don't have to think about it, but it impacts us all day long, every day. So that's the same with these 3 principles. So what are they? Okay, so the first one I'm going to talk about is thought. And I'll tell you what it is, and then I'll tell you just a little bit about how this understanding has impacted me personally. So what's the principle of thought? The principle of thought is simply the fact that we think. And we think all day long. And we have a conversation that goes through our heads all day long. It's like a ticker tape. And that conversation, those thoughts that we're having, they create our story. They create everything around us. And here's the cool thing. We have this sense, maybe it's cultural, that we're out in the world having experiences, and that those experiences are creating our thoughts. And in fact, that's a trick. It's not true. Our thoughts are creating our experiences in every moment. We live from the inside out. We feel like we're living from the outside in, but we're actually living from the inside out. One of the best examples that I think that illustrates this is if you're driving along and somebody cuts you off. You can get really mad, right?
We don't share our thoughts on that, do we?
Right. And you think, it feels like that person cutting you off created that feeling of annoyance. But it's just as likely that someone can cut you off and you can be really patient about it. Oh, I wonder what's wrong with them today. I wonder wonder why they got up on the wrong side of the bed. And so you can see in those two examples that it's not the other driver that created your experience. It's your thinking in the moment that created your experience. And the thing that's been so cool for me in seeing this is that I've stopped blaming the people in my life for the way I feel. Because the way I feel is coming from my thinking in the moment, not anything that anyone else ever did or said. Doesn't mean I have to like it. Doesn't mean I have to like it. But when I recognize that my feelings about it are coming from me and not from them, it opens up a whole new world. So, the next principle is the principle of mind. And the cool thing about these principles is that, one of the cool things, is that Sydney Banks was one of the first people to recognize that we live in a world of psychology and we also live in a world of spirituality. And for some reason, through the ages, our society has split those two things. And we've either gone down a path of spirituality or we've gone down a path of psychology. And we don't tend to bring them together. And yet they're constantly linked, and we live in both those worlds all the time. So the principle of universal mind explains that there is a universal intelligence that is always here for us. It created everything around us and created us. It's the explanation for everything we can't explain. So, for example, our hearts beat all day long and there's nothing we ever have to do to make that happen. There's a universal intelligence behind that. Same with our blood flowing through our body. We don't have to do anything. It's there for us. The trees in the fall turn color every year. And then they fall off, the leaves fall off, and they're dormant all winter. And in the spring they come back. Isn't that crazy that they know how to do that? They just know how to do it. And those things are around us everywhere. And it's the same intelligence that provides each and every one of us with our common sense, with a really great idea when it just pops into our head. There's nothing we had to do to make that idea show up. When we don't know, and we don't know, and we don't know, and all of a sudden we do know. And for any of you who've been around little kids, There's, you know, they teach themselves how to crawl, they teach themselves how to walk. Like, isn't it cool that we're born with that? It's an innate intelligence, an innate wisdom that we're all given as being part of this universe. And what that means is that that wisdom is always available to you. It's always available to me. It's available to every single one of us. And I guess, you know, again, it's kind of cultural that we tend to live between our ears and we think that all the answers are right here. And yet when we let this space settle, when we let all that thinking settle and we're quiet, there's something so much deeper that's available to us for new ideas, for new thoughts, for a deeper feeling. And just seeing that we are up in our heads so often can allow us to settle and let that other space come through. So that's universal mind. That's the second principle. And then the third principle is the principle of consciousness. And consciousness, in some ways, it's simpler than the other two, but some ways it's even more complex than the other two. So very simply, it's just our awareness. We can be aware that there's this universal intelligence. We can be aware that we're caught up in our thinking, and that's really powerful. And the other thing that's really cool about consciousness is consciousness kind of explains sort of how much we can see at any given moment. And you know how, like, when you're really mad or you're really frustrated, your options get narrow. You just can't see what to do. But then if you're settled, all of a sudden it's like your field of vision opens up and the possibilities get even more and more expansive. So it's tied to thought in that way, and it's tied to universal mind in that way. When we can see more, when we can let our thoughts settle and our vision opens and we can see more, we're giving more space to that universal intelligence to come into us, to come through us, to bring us new ideas, to bring us possibility. And there's another really cool thing about consciousness and the way that consciousness interplays with thought. So we've been given this okay, we have thinking, and our thinking gives us our feelings in the moment. So if I'm upset or mad or aggravated, I know, because I've kind of learned to trust that that's my thinking in the moment. And the interesting thing is that all of those emotions, they show up in our body. You know how you feel angry, you literally feel it? Or you feel frustrated, you feel it? That feeling is another gift from this universal energy telling us that we're caught up in our thinking. So when I feel frustrated, I feel it in my body, I can go, oh, I'm caught up in my thinking. I got some problematic thinking going on. It doesn't even matter what it is. I can just say, oh, caught up in my thinking. And in that moment, I could say, oh, well, I guess my thinking's not really serving me as well as it could be right now. So I'm going to give myself a chance to settle before I make any big decisions. I'm going to recognize that I'm caught up in my head. And whatever I need to do to settle myself, and that's different for all of us. We all know, you know, for some of us it might be taking a walk, for some of us it might be watching a football game, for some of us it might be reading a book, having a cup of tea. You know, whatever it is for you that helps you settle in the moment is going to put you in touch with that greater resource, that deeper resource that makes so much more available. And we're going to go up and down that it's like an elevator of consciousness. You know how when you go, like if you go up a glass elevator, you can see, you know, really far, and then when the elevator goes back down, you can't see as much. That happens all day long. All day long, yeah. So, I guess before I turn it over to questions, I just kind of, well, I just want to tell you a little bit more about how this understanding has impacted me. And it's allowed me to be more settled a lot of the time. It's allowed me to accept myself more when I'm not settled, which is also really cool, and not fight with myself, and recognize that we're all human, and we're all given this spiritual nature that has such deep answers, but we're also given this human side of thought, which means we're gonna get aggravated, and we're gonna get upset, and we're gonna get frustrated. And when we allow ourselves to be human about it, it passes. You know, thoughts come into our head all day long, and they leave all day long. And we can choose to hold on to them, we can choose to stew on them. You know when something happens and you're so mad, you start calling up everyone you know to tell them? Right? Right? We all do that. Well, that doesn't help let go of it. You know, that churns it and churns it and churns it. And yet when you just let yourself be mad, it'll go away. And a new thought will come and a new possibility will come. So that's what this understanding has done for me. The other thing it's done for me is given me a much deeper acceptance of the people in my life. Seeing the humanity in them, seeing the deep resources in them and the deep wisdom in them, seeing the beauty in everyone, seeing the sameness in everyone, because we're all living in this world of thought, and we all have access to these deep resources. So yeah, I guess that's where I'll stop talking and let you guys ask me stuff. What's coming up for you?
What you're talking about reminds me of a book I read in college called Learned Optimism. It was just a book. And there were all kinds of studies of people that were optimistic, and how, you know, when you ruminate, when you tell yourself over and over negative thinking, it actually affects your health.
Yeah.
And so, like, we have a choice of our thinking. We have control over our thinking to some aspect. And you can, like, counter your thoughts. So that what you're saying reminded me of that book. And if there's anybody that was interested in what she said, this book's called Learned Optimism, and it was about all these different studies by Sigmund Freud, and the people that learn to control their thoughts and think positive about more things, they actually live better lives. Like, so it was a nice book.
Yeah. Did everybody hear? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So can I add to that a little bit?
Yeah, did you read it?
No, I haven't read it, but I definitely heard a lot of people talk about that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it was a really good book. And like the people that were even diagnosed with cancer, if they thought better about it,
Yeah.
they had better outcomes. Their prognosis was different than the people that were negative and, pessimists. So,
Yeah,
so
it's
do you
cool.
think in the sports psychology, the kids that rumorated that they were bad at baseball, they did worse? And,
Yeah. So can I tell you, I have a bunch of thoughts about that.
yeah.
So first of all, it's absolutely true. When we're in a better state of well-being, we do better at everything. We do better at sports. We perform better in our jobs. We heal better. But I'm going to say but, because it's really, really hard when you feel like crap to tell yourself I should be in a better mood. And when you do, when you feel like crap and you try to tell yourself, you try to push a better mood into your head, in that space, you're actually fighting with yourself. And that fighting with yourself, it doesn't help. Because it's like you're putting a mask on, but that bad mood is still there. The only thing that really helps is truly feeling better. So what's the difference between trying to get better thoughts in your head and truly having better thoughts there. And what I have learned is that by doing whatever I can to accept that bad mood, actually feeling it in every bone in my body and accepting it as what it is, and trusting that it's not going to hang around forever, that's where I find the space, the little crack that leads to the hopefulness and the possibility that a new thought will come in. And it's in that space that the negative thinking just starts to dissipate, because everything comes and goes over time. Everything is cyclical. We're always going to feel better, worse, better, worse, better, worse. And so when we can accept what is, it starts to drift away, and that's the space where the new thinking has room to come. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. What you were talking about just really reminded me of that book. What a great book.
Cool.
Yeah, and how you can really choose what you're thinking about. And if it's something bad, you're better off not thinking about it over and over. That's kind of what I tried to do in the book, yeah.
Yeah. And if you can't get rid of it, don't worry, because it'll go away on its own.
That's right.
Yeah, I'm one of those people that talk everything through my head.
Yeah.
And then every once in a while, I will kind of like blurt things out. When I do that, things go wrong. But if you talk it over in your head, and sometimes it might be a day or two, you have to talk through things.
Yeah.
And then you get that peaceful space
Yeah, that's cool.
that you come to.
And I would say that's your own special way. Like that's universal mind showing up for you and telling you how to settle. And you know, a lot of times when I do this with a group, I tell people, like, the number one rule here is no helping. Because what starts to happen is everyone wants to know how. How do you do that? Tell me how to do that. And the problem with telling somebody how to do it is that you're going to get the answer that that person found. You're not going to get the answer that works for you. So the true answer is always going to be inside of you. And it's so cool that you found that space where you've learned how to settle and allow new thinking to come in.
It does take time, because sometimes you notice when you just open your mouth and say things, it doesn't turn out right.
Yeah.
It just goes south. But it does take time to just like get it, just keep talking to yourself.
And you know it's going to come.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Thanks for sharing. Who else?
I think it was just kind of neat when you were saying about how, like, when you accept the bad mood,
Yeah.
because I know, like, for me, if I'm in a really bad mood or something really crappy happens, I just kind of jump and, like, I can't think further than, you know, what just happened. But as soon as you start to accept it and kind of breathe a little bit, you can think of all these different ways to handle it instead of just the one irrational way of, like, maybe yelling or saying something you shouldn't have said. So it's kind of neat because we do that every day. We just don't stop and think about it. It's just kind of like a reaction.
Yeah.
So I thought that was neat.
Yeah, it's cool. And that's what consciousness is. You know, when you're in it, your field of vision gets so narrow, it's hard to see anything but what's right in front of your face. And then when the thinking starts to settle, your ability to see possibilities starts to open. Yeah, so cool. Okay, so I'm just kind of curious if you guys are willing to share with me. Of my 4 categories, if you're willing to, well, let's maybe divide it into 2. So I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if this feels true to you versus if this doesn't feel true to you. So if this doesn't feel true to you, anybody willing to say? And I don't mean to put you on the spot. Well, raise your hand if it feels true. Okay. a specific question?
I have a comment. I made a specific conscious effort years ago to, anything that negative that happens in my life, I sleep on it before I react to it and have a comment on it and deal with it. And that has really helped me.
Yeah, because you settle when you sleep.
Something similar to that, and I know I've shared this with David before, but my girls played sports all their lives, travel teams, and my husband did a lot of coaching. And when you're managing a team, you usually have a lot of parents who have some negative thoughts about your decisions, and that maybe they approach you. And my husband always told his parents that he has a 24-hour rule. If you're upset with the decision I made, take 24 hours, think about it. If you're so upset, come to me tomorrow and we'll talk about it. And 9 times out of 10, it usually they realize that that was really silly for them to be upset. And so I kind of use that 24-hour rule in my own life sometimes. So
Well, and the intuition that he found that rule, I mean, how many coaches have ever come up with, I mean, it's such a great thing.
yeah, because you're going to react. You're not, you're going to,
Yeah,
the way they're going to react is usually not the right outcome, so.
Yeah. And the thing that I just think it's so cool that he came up with that idea. And that's such a great example of that space of intuition that can guide us, that's always available to guide us and to help us make decisions and come up with ideas. I was talking with a new potential client yesterday, and he was telling me that he's looking for a sense of contentment in his life. He's worked really hard his whole life, and we have a tendency to look outside and look at our circumstances and think that our circumstances are creating our experience, right? So it's like if I love my job, then it's creating a good life, and if I don't love my job, it's creating a bad life. And what this guy realized, and he's been really successful his whole life, and he hasn't found contentment. And he's finally realizing that all these things that he thought were on the checklist of creating contentment didn't create it for him. And so he's wondering, where do I look now? And he can kind of tell that it's a spiritual path. And he even said to me, maybe I'll go to India for a month, it's like study with some guru. And I said to him, if you want to go to India, go to India. But don't forget that contentment is what's truly, it's what's inside you. That's your true self. And actually, because I was supposed to talk about gratitude, and I never got to gratitude. This is the gratitude part. So what happens is, we're born in that space of spiritual intelligence. That's the part that's given to us that teaches us how to walk and teaches us how to talk. Nobody has to really teach us that. It's in us. And also in us is pure love, pure joy, pure gratitude. That's what exists before we start thinking. It's always there, it's always in us. And when we get caught up in our thinking, when we get caught up in our psychology, it gets so loud, and the shoulds, you should do this, you're supposed to do that. If you do this, it'll create contentment for you. All of that is thought created and made up. And when we start to let that go, and we start to be able to listen to that inner space, which is so quiet, the thought is so loud, and the inner voice is so quiet. It's in that quiet space that gratitude always exists, that joy always exists, that love always exists.
last time I was like, oh, this is gonna be, you know, so easy to follow these principles and try to like, but I mean, it's so easy to get caught up in your mind and not be able to, you know, follow the right thing. I need to work on relationships. But it's nice to like rehear it and, you know, to be conscious of that and like know like, hey, I think my thoughts are like really making this a harder situation than what it has to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and there's something about, there's something about when you see something in a different way, it's like, it's almost like you can never unsee it again.
Right.
And yet, we do have habits. We have thought habits that we've been carrying around our whole lives. And until you even see it, until you even see it as a habit, it feels like it's serving us until we start to see the possibility of something different. And particularly in relationships, when we start to see that every single person around us is creating their own reality by their own thoughts, including me, then the possibility of accepting them for what they are, and accepting that they're creating what they're creating, and that they're doing the best they can, given that they're thinking that they have in the moment, and that I'm doing the best I can given my thinking in the moment, and that my thinking is creating my experience. Their actions, their words aren't creating my experience.
Right. Yeah. And I'm gonna have to have that in the back of my head all the time.
There's a really wonderful book, well, maybe you guys have read it, because I know
The
David was-
relationship handbook.
Yeah.
I've been waiting for it. Sarah hasn't.
Yeah.
But like,
It's a really,
right,
really
it's on
good
the-
book.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to. I'm ready.
she's
for it.
next in line.
Yeah.
And since we're recording for anyone who couldn't come, the book is called The Relationship Handbook. It's by Dr. George Kransky. And he talks about these principles, and he talks about them in the context of relationships. And it was written actually for married couples. However, it really applies to every relationship that you have in your life. Time for a couple more questions if anybody else has any. Yeah, go ahead.
I've been sitting there listening to all this, you know, and being prompted inside. I'm a pastor, so I go on the spiritual level. I can take off here and preach to you in all directions about what you're saying.
Yeah.
One thing I'd just like to say is all your intelligence has come, by the way I understand it, is by reading, okay? Surrounding yourself, okay?
Yeah.
It wasn't born innate in you, okay? You got that from all the intelligence of your studies, if you went to college and took up a major in psychiatry or sociology or whatever. Well, it's the same with me. The universal experience you talk about, the only thing I like to just share as a pastor, okay, is God. You have to first believe that there is a creator and it's God, okay? If you don't believe that, then we just shut ourselves off, okay? God is a spirit. You are made up of a spirit. The real you is inside you, what you're talking about. And how we relate to God, since He's a spirit, we can only relate to Him, the Bible says, by our spirit. So the Bible says we're a spirit, a real person. We live in a body and we have a soul. Our soul is our emotions, our intellect. Okay? That's where our upbringing comes from. Since when a child, there are certain things that are innate in that when the child's born, he learns to walk and all this. But as he grows up, where does he get that intelligence? By the surrounding, by his peers, his family, right? So that's how he starts to form his thought lives, okay, and patterns. So one thing I'll just leave you with, The Bible says it's a book, either you believe it or you don't believe it. It's one of the oldest books and letters put together from the beginning of time, all right? Bible says to renew our mind, and that's what you've done, getting information, renew it, but it says by the word of God. And when you can renew it, because the Bible is made up, it's totally a positive, God's a positive God, all right? And he just wants to encourage you, everybody, that there is a great life here, you got a great potential. He didn't create you for doing nothing, okay? Everybody has something in them to accomplish in life, okay? You weren't here for quit it, he could have did it, he could have made you in some other age or some year, but for us right now, we were born in this century, all right? So that's the whole thing. Find out, by communing with God, what we were created to. What does he want us each to do? So you have a good, how would I say, vocation to explain about the mind and everything like that, all right? So that's all I want to say. I mean, that's what I'm saying. So I'm not going against what you're saying, but I'm just trying to...
I think what she's saying too is she's teaching us how not to be angry with people and to show the love instead
That's
of
right.
our thoughts jumping up, which we're human.
But you see, you can correct that the closer you get with the Lord.
So
okay?
guys, so
And-
if I might, since I'm sitting up front here, I get to take the reins. I love this, okay? I love this. And I'm a fairly religious person myself. And when I talk about universal mind, for me, personally, that's God. And at the same time, when I speak to a room like this, I don't know what your relationship
Right.
is on any kind of religious level, or what you call, whether you have something in your life that you call God or not. And what I think that the incredible opportunity to point for each of us is that there is our true self, which is deep inside of us, that gives us guidance. It's our spiritual nature. And whether you see that spiritual nature and you want to call it God, or you want to call it the intelligence of the universe, or any other name you want to call it. One of my teachers had a client who called it Bob. It doesn't matter. The principle, the thing that's true for all of us, which is why I love what you're saying so much, is that yes, it's in each and every one of us, and it's there for us to listen to. And there's evidence of it all around us, whether we are religious or not. So I hope that you feel that, because yes, I right on. Yeah. Cool. Okay, so I have time for one more. If somebody's got something.
I'd like to say something too.
Yeah.
Everyone, whether we realize it or not, every one of us goes every single day doing all the things that you said at one point in our life. Like, I can think of instances like when I waitressed in my early 30s, we were at a restaurant where it was mostly very old people. And we would groan when they would come and sit in our section, and they could be difficult and cheap and all those things that old people get. But that is when I realized in my mid-30s that is a person. And at first I started to make a game out of it, that I'm gonna get around this person, and there were a lot of them, that they're so grumpy and miserable. And before you knew it, it opened up a whole new world of this person has lived 80 or 85 years old. experienced a lifetime of things. And once you can get around that part of it, they actually start to come out of that being crabby or mean or whatever and start to be happy and smile and can't wait to see you and can't wait to tell you something. And I mean, it really is all about how you internally react to what is being put in front of you. The other thing is, I've been in a grief group for a long time. A lot of us who've had child loss can go down one road or another. One road is a bitter, angry, sad, miserable road. The other one, which I contribute my faith in God that has taken me down the other path, is it opens you up to being more compassionate, more patient, more kind. I'm not sure why, I just know that that's the experience. And last, when you're talking about acceptance of other people in your lives and your relationships, my husband is my best friend. And he makes me crazy, and he causes me so much stress. And we separated for a few years, and then when we decided to get back together, I decided, okay, I'm not going to let all those little things bother me. He leaves the cupboard doors open, he leaves the silverware drawer open, he leaves empty boxes in the freezer, he does all these things that make me crazy. And he still does. I've overcome all that little stuff. Like today, I have to run him by insulin because he's had diabetes since he was 10 and he waits till he runs out to tell me. Like, it makes me crazy. But you're right. It depends on how you choose to handle what you're being given. Whether it makes you angry, cranky, whatever, impatient, frustrated. And so there is a lot there that we actually all do every single day. We just don't realize it, but it can make a big difference in our own mental and emotional well-being if we learn to react differently than we do sometimes.
And when you're guided by that inner space versus being guided by that personal thinking that may or may not be helpful, that can just change your world.
It does. It really does.
That's so good. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, so nice.
Yeah.